Hello, friends, united in the cause of a more civil humanity. Before getting started today, I want to give you a little message to say that this conversation with Christina Hoff Sommers, I had promised that I was not going to edit any of these shows. This one was an exception. There were some technical difficulties. The video recording failed, and so there are going to be some things different about this. I did go ahead and edit this because there were some other problems with the audio recording. I won't go too deeply into what those were. There were also some situational kinds of things, so that I did need to edit this one, not for content, just to make the audio more usable for you, the listener. So this one, though most will not be edited, this one was. And you will find, too, that the ending is kind of abrupt. There was a dog involved and needed to get the thing ended. So there's a reason that this is going to be a little bit different. But please, go ahead and enjoy my conversation with Christina Hoff Sommers. I'm here with Christina Hoff Sommers. Thank you very much for joining me. I am thrilled to have you here with me. You are the factual feminist. Can you tell the audience here, what does that mean?
Well, I have been a feminist since high school, but I believe women are helped by truth and good evidence. I like an evidence-based feminism. Over the years, I have found too many false narratives, myths, people getting carried away with victim politics. It's not helpful. And so I started this series on YouTube called The Factual Feminist. And each episode, I try to correct a myth and set things back on track. And initially, my mother said to me, "But darling, how can you make so many videos?" I was making them every week for a while. I said, "I can be making them for the next 30 years. There has been so much has gone wrong with feminist misinformation, if you will." And there are myths that are out there that are almost beyond rational analysis. They've been repeated so many times they've taken on the aura of truth. And I think this is harmful. I think it's divisive, and it doesn't help women. It doesn't help anyone.
Yeah. So I have a lot of things I'd like to ask you about that. Before that, personally, who are you?
Well, I'm from California. That's part of my core identity, even though I left at 17. But I grew up in Southern California. And I pursued my PhD in philosophy. So I taught philosophy for 20 years. Ignore that. I taught philosophy for many years. And then I went to a think tank because I started to write about social and cultural issues. And I wrote a book called Who Stole Feminism? And that book just suddenly I became the kind of dissident feminist everyone called when they wanted a different point of view. But at the think tank, it's sort of like a university without students. I lecture on a lot of campuses, so I still have a lot of contact with students. And we have a lot of young people who work as research assistants and interns and so forth. So I'm still in touch with students, but I don't have to grade papers. And I don't have to go to a lot of meetings. So
sounds like the best of all worlds. So that's pretty cool.
So, and also I'm a mother. I have a stepson, Tamler Sommers, and he's a philosophy professor at the University of Houston. He has a podcast called The Very Bad Wizards, which is he and a friend discuss and argue about philosophy. It's amusing. And my other son,
Cool.
David, is a teacher in New York City. Both English majors. I begged them not to do it because it's so impractical. But they did. But they're my two sons. And I don't know. What else do you want to know? That's not
so
that
did you have a hand in him becoming a philosophy professor?
No, we actually begged him not to do that too. They were both very good students. And I thought, I was reading all this data that the boys and girls major in different things. On average, you find far more men in economics and engineering, and the women are over in English and comp lit and art history. And there they were. And in his classes, my son, one was at Penn and one was at Vanderbilt. Their classes would be, mostly women and them. And they didn't mind that. But I just said, this is not a practical major. And then Tamler goes into philosophy, goes to grad school, so.
Yeah. So you still call yourself a feminist, even though you find yourself at odds with a lot of what feminists are putting out, right? And you stand in opposition to a lot of the myths, as you say, right? Why are you still a feminist? What's the what does that mean?
I don't want to give up that name. First and second wave feminism, these are important chapters in the history of freedom. And everyone should be aware of this movement, and proud of this movement. It's a huge American success story, a Western success story, and now many parts of the world. It's had a tremendous influence. So I still identify with the kind of first principles of Enlightenment feminism. But I've watched over the years the movement has been hijacked by various groups who go to extremes and alienate everyone else. So now if you look at polls, even now when feminism seems a bit sort of chic, but if you do a poll and ask people, are you a feminist? The vast majority say no. It's hard to get it over 25%.
Even women, or is that the general?
Men and women.
Really? Wow.
Fewer men than women, but Vox.com or YouGov and these sorts of things, the Pew Research, the Reuters, they've done surveys and you get vast majority saying no. I think it was, perhaps it was Vox or a YouGov poll asked, why not? Why aren't you? And they said it was too extreme. That was the number one reason. And I agree. So I think that I don't want to give it up. And I'm still fighting for it. I'm also still a registered Democrat, though I'm very, disenchanted with a lot of Democratic politics. And I can't quite bring myself to register as a Republican because in my family, the family religion was the Democratic Party. And I could do almost anything, go to jail. My parents would be loving and forgiving, but being a Republican would have been just too much. So.
Yeah, that says a lot. That's yeah. I kind of think the Democrat or Republican is kind of they're arguing over who should have power over me rather than whether they should have power over me, and it seems in a lot of ways kind of a moot point anyway.
Yeah, living here in Washington, when you see what goes on, it doesn't inspire confidence in either party. So.
Yeah, for sure. So you want to hold on to feminism. You feel like it's been stolen, right? In fact, that was the title of your book.
Yes, it's been stolen, and I want to get it back. Yeah. And I think that a healthy, evidence-based women's movement, it will serve everyone, men and women. And there are many parts of the world that haven't had let alone two major waves of feminism. They've hardly had a ripple. And I go to international women's conferences and I meet women who are like the suffragists of their country, the famous, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. And they're asking for help and understanding. And I think that's probably the most important thing we could be doing is making common cause with women's groups around the world. And yet when I go to campuses, what I find are a lot of young women, privileged young women, with more opportunities than any women in history, probably most women of the world, and yet they consider themselves oppressed. They're turned in on their own, subordination. And it's ridiculous, and I feel bad. So I try to suggest that they may not be oppressed. It doesn't always go over well. When I was at Oberlin, they were all triggered, and 30 women fled to a safe room. 30 women and a therapy dog. I triggered a dog. That's the first. Anyway, it's ridiculous. I go to campus, not always, but in many cases they'll be carrying on. And this is different. I've been going to campuses for years as a dissident feminist. Used to be young women would come, or women's studies professors, we'd debate. Sometimes we'd go out for drinks. Now it's, that happens sometimes, but not usually, but since around 2012 or 13, something changed on the campus with this intersectionality and this new identity politics and the safe space, trigger warning, check your privilege feminism. And they're very intolerant and very angry, and it's hard to reason with them. I try to understand their point of view and find places where we agree and go back, but they're not, they're just angry.
It's remarkable. You first came onto my radar, I think was around that whole, trigger thing and the safe space at Oberlin. And it just seemed like, you are you're on their side, right? I mean, you are a feminist, and yet to say that, hey, you know what, you're in the first world, a lot of good things are going for you, that this is so intolerable that not only is it disagreed with, but it's something beyond that, right? We mentioned Democrats and Republicans, and I think of this 2016 election, and it's just if you vote for the other person, then I can't be your friend anymore.
This is the thing, this new polarization where people truly hate the other side. And I just don't understand it. And maybe it's my years as a philosophy professor. I'm always interested in understanding what they think, why they think it. I have my opinions, but as a philosophy professor, I didn't see it as my job to transfer my opinions. I wanted to help my students look at a very controversial issues, see both sides, and then they could draw their own conclusions. But as a teacher, I gave them a apparatus, teaching them critical thinking and logic. They could draw their own conclusions. But now, I just don't see much of that. Even in the classroom, I see teachers who use the classroom as a forum for their politics. And they don't even bother giving the other side. It's left out altogether, or it's there just to be ridiculed, not respectfully presented. So that's where we are, very polarized and just a lot of rancor on both sides.
Yeah, it's really discouraging. Is there? Do you see any way that we can find a way to at least have conversations with people?
Well, I see a lot of good signs. For example, more and more people are drawn. Do you know? I guess he's a podcast. No, he's on YouTube. Dave Rubin.
Oh yeah, he's great.
He's great, and he brings together sort of disenchanted liberals and conservatives.
Yeah.
Particularly around the issue of free speech. And I think that's a unifying cause. There's a group called FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education. I love this group. And it's basically a civil liberties group based in Philadelphia. And they're trying to protect free speech on campus and due process. And they do it beautifully. And they are bipartisan, which I think that's the hope, is when you can get thoughtful liberals and conservatives together, find something they agree on, and defend it, while the rest of the society is so polarized and carried away. I mean, a lot of people aren't even paying attention. That's another problem.
Yeah. So, and Dave Rubin, I'm a supporter of his on Patreon, and I really appreciate a lot of, his efforts to, and I mean, he's a liberal himself, all right, although he gets accused of being alt-right and all these things. But yeah, neat guy that's having thoughtful conversations with people of all different persuasions. And that's really an inspiration for me trying to do this, is let's talk about things, right? So you brought up a term, you said privilege, right? That these young women on the campus are privileged. And it's a term that, I think there's a lot of good to think about privilege and what does it mean and all of those things, right? Let me kind of tell you my thoughts on it and get you to react, right? So when I hear, privilege, I think if you're telling me that I have a lot to be grateful for and that I should express that gratitude and acknowledge that there are a lot of people in the world who don't have the same blessings that I do, then I'm all for it, right? I mean, I completely agree with that. And I'm for very much, each of us acknowledging the ways that we have a lot of reason to be grateful. I have little patience for preaching at somebody and saying that your problems are insignificant because of, whatever it may be, right? You had a video on the Factual Feminist YouTube channel about should males check their privilege, right? I think was the title of it. And expressing that, hey, there are a lot of advantages and disadvantages to being a man as well as to being a woman. And, that I don't know. I guess to me, when I think of the term feminism, I think of blame, right? I think of terms like patriarchy and all of these things. And so that's why I would never call myself a feminist, but, or I won't say never, but that's the reason I don't call myself a feminist. I don't know. Can you just react to that?
Well, I agree that, of course, you should count your blessings and be grateful and realize that other people may have had struggles that were harder than yours. What bothers me on the campus with intersectionality and the check your privilege movement is that, as you say, it's really not it's really not about individuals acknowledging their blessings. It's tribalistic people breaking down into victim groups, and by these groups, but none of these groups prove stable because the people are bicker with one another, and there's a kind of victim Olympics. So the groups keep subdividing. So now, you'll have a group of, Latina feminists. One of them, let's say Latina lesbians, but one of them will have a non-Latina partner, and that confers privilege on her, and people are angry at her. They start fighting. And I've seen this for years because this is new on the campus, but it's been going on for years in sort of feminist conferences and things. So it's very divisive because it's more about blaming other people. It's almost a religion where people get carried away with telling people to check their privilege. It's another word for sin, original sin, except in a religion, at least there's redemption. I don't see that there's any redemption here. You're just infinitely guilty and you're not worth listening to. Well, I object to this at so many levels. I don't like the idea of collective guilt or collective virtue. I mean, that's something we overcame in the European Enlightenment, where we tried to look at people as individuals and place blame and guilt on an individual, not on your culture or your class or your race or your ethnic group. It's so bad psychologically at so many levels. It's bringing out the worst in people. The worst, it's just, and Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff have written about this very effectively in The Atlantic, how this movement is divisive and psychologically harmful. But I don't know how to stop it. I think it's going to have to go full course. And I'm wondering what the campus is going to be like this year, because it seems to be getting worse each year. Maybe it peaked in Evergreen State or Berkeley with riots, or Charles Murray at Middlebury. These are cases where there was violence. We'll see if this year is better or worse.
Yeah. So, patriarchy, what is that?
Well, patriarchy is a society where the men have the power and the women don't. The United States is not a patriarchy. Women do have power. Women, the doors are open. And what I see is that where women want to go, we go. There's no way to stop us. Do we go exactly where men go? Do the same number of women want to be in combat, or the same number of women want to be welders? Or, women want their liberation, but they don't necessarily want to be exactly like men. So there are differences between the sexes that I think explain the configuration of people in professions and in jobs. And I try to remain open-minded when a feminist comes and says, well, here's an injustice. And almost every time that I look into her data, she's left something out. Take something like the famous pay gap. It's such an injustice because women earn only, for the same work, women earn 23 cents less than men, or 22 cents less. What they fail to do is to take into account the hours worked per week. Men work more hours. What did they study in college? Or what profession are they in? Women tend overwhelmingly to be in the caring and helping professions, and men are in a lot of the technical professions that pay more. And then you have to say, well, were they kept out of them? I see the opposite. I see every possible, enticement for women to come into, say, computer programming, computer camps and all sorts of innovations. And I admire these, but it's not working. Yes, it hasn't changed all that much. The statistics show, in fact, year after year, you don't get that many more girls. At a certain point, maybe there are different interests. We have a lot of data from psychological studies on vocational interests, and you do find there's a difference in interest in people versus things. So, you ask someone, would you rather spend 2 weeks talking to someone about their problems, or would you rather have a machine you could take apart and put it back together? And it's far more women than men prefer to work with people than with the machine. So that would predict they would be interested in other fields. Yeah. So I always find that when you look at the wage gap, most of it, if not all of it, according to some study, it can be explained by the different paths men and women take. Now, is that because of patriarchy? Maybe you could say that in 1965 or 55, but in 2017, that seems to me to be sort of patronizing, or matronizing would be the word, to say, though, well, the women aren't freely choosing their careers. Well, of course they are, insofar as anybody freely chooses anything. Maybe feminist, advocates are not choosing their passions. Maybe that was, we get into the free will and determinist debate, and that's not going to be resolved anytime soon. So I think we should err on the side of respecting people's choices, and men and women do not make the same choices.
I think that makes sense. It's, of course, along a distribution, right? So that there are certainly a lot of women who want to do the things that are traditionally, the realm of men. And I think that you and I would agree there's no reason to oppose them being able to do so.
Absolutely. That was the big achievement of second wave feminism. We needed that because there were arbitrary barriers. And so women couldn't even begin to compete on a par with men. But now women can. And it's true, there's still problems and things aren't perfect. So I do think we need a women's movement to attend to that. But I don't think things are perfect for men either. And we have this asymmetry. We have hundreds and upon hundreds of women's advocacy groups and almost nothing for men. And people say, well, men don't need them. They run the world. Elite men run the world. But what about poor men? And what about boys in school who are so seriously behind across ethnic lines? If you compare boys and girls, the girls are doing better than their male counterparts in school. They're more likely to go to college, that sort of thing. So I guess my feminism would be what feminism was meant to be, really about basic fairness and respect for women and men, but not female chauvinism or male chauvinism. I don't like either.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. I guess, it's kind of the same thing that I said about Democrats and Republicans. I kind of see feminists and men's rights activists are kind of two sides of the same coin, right? There's seems to be a supremacist running through either of those sides of an argument. And it seems to kind of lose the idea of, to me, we complement each other, right? Men and women go great together, and we do a lot of things wonderfully together. And I think, the idea of marriage is a really good example of that, there are roles to be played, and, whatever works for any individual family is probably what's best for that family.
Like they can work it out, and I completely agree. There are always people that are exceptions to the rules. So you have brilliant women going into, let's say, computer programming or naval architecture, metallurgy or something, but on average you find fewer, the pool of people interested in that and who have the skills to do that, it's just there are more men than women who pursue these things. But there are always exceptions, and that makes the world interesting. So my style of feminism is completely insistent upon equality of opportunity and open doors, but I don't insist on statistical parity in everywhere.
Yeah. I have come across people who are insisting on, as a software professional myself, right? I hear a lot about software conferences and speaking, and the assertion that you should refuse to speak at a conference unless it is 50% female speakers, which I think is going too far, right?
It's way too far, and it's cheating women, because like my field of philosophy, it was largely a male pursuit for, very few women philosophers in the historically. Now we can study philosophy. We do. Not as many women as men. It's a little more like engineering than any of the humanities, but in terms of the ratio of men and women. But that means that I want to read the great philosophers and benefit from the finest minds, and then suddenly to say, oh no, I only want to hear women, or I only want to read women. That is cutting out your opportunity to learn and to be a good thinker and to be educated. And this idea that you're not going to go to conferences if you can't hear the men. Yes, go to the conferences, hear the men, and learn from them, figure out what they did, and then go do it. But what they'd rather do is complain and whine. Just go and do it. And I don't know, people say, oh, you can't. Look, it's not perfect, But where is it better than here? Where do women have more opportunities? If there's a world out there that's better, it's not. I haven't heard of it. It's some of the Northern European countries and the United States. We now have the same opportunities as men, but I know it's unpopular to say that in many circles.
It is, yeah, and that's part of why I was terrified to start having conversations about these things, because I know there are ramifications to it, and you have experienced that yourself. I'd like to ask you about, what immediately comes to mind is sexual harassment and some of those things. Where are those places where it is still less than perfect for being a woman in this world?
Well, you have sexual harassment, and we have laws against it. And again, the second wave of feminism, there was a lot of consciousness raising and things changed. And I see a big difference. In fact, I think on the college campus, it's gone to such an extreme that it's almost, a kind of, people can't say anything, or it's as though anything that's sexy is thought to be sexist. So if a young woman overhears someone telling an off-color joke, she can run to the harassment officer. That's too extreme. Yeah. So the Supreme Court set a very high standard for, a threshold for what counts as harassment on a campus, and we should stick to that. It was very reasonable, and it didn't rule out normal, everyday banter. So I worry that it's just gone too far, and people are starting, to police each other in ways which are unhelpful, and it's going to make men not want to. Another thing about men, on average, as a mother of two sons, I have seen this. When they're together, the men show affection for one another by teasing each other and by little put downs and, just joking. And women do that less. And I think when a woman suddenly is and there are girls with a lot of brothers or something, they can do it too.
Sure.
But some women will get into a new situation working with a lot of guys, and there are all these put downs, and she's like, "Oh, that's so insulting," and and that hurts other women who kind of don't mind that and understand that that's how men are. So you can't always try to police everything and get it to be just the way you want. Now, do I think people should be polite? Yes, but there are ways of doing that and bringing out the best in people that I think should exclude approaching, a group of programmers or physicists or whoever you're working with anger and reporting them and monitoring, and there's just too much of that. And you're going to see men are going to be afraid to mentor women. They're going to be afraid. There's a pushback.
Yeah, really interesting that it works against women to have this kind of walking on eggshells kind of mentality.
It's not fun. Who wants to do that? And the other thing is, I think men and women should be able to joke about one another. If you go back to my parents' generation, or I don't know, the 50s, and you see writers like James Thurber, they were always joking. They were, and it wasn't like the end of the world if someone made a joke about men or a joke about women. And now, my goodness, you've had things like, someone I forget, it was some poor Nobel laureate, and he was in Singapore or somewhere, and he just made a little joke. That was the end, the Twitter mobs attacked, and he was a very nice man, very egalitarian. His wife was a scientist. It didn't matter. They went after him. There was another comet scientist who had a shirt that had cartoon figures of, I don't know, attractive women, but it was some kind of crazy shirt. He was denounced by lots of people on Twitter, and it just made women look like harpies and intolerant, and, leave people alone. Yes, go after the lecherous sociopaths. I know they're there, but leave men alone, and people should give each other the benefit of the doubt and live and let live is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. It's really a matter of perspective, right? And just trying to understand somebody's perspective. The idea that we can't have a joke, right? It might give you the impression that, hey, women aren't very fun, We have these pattern matching brains, and when we see some of this, if coming from some women that, hey, it's not okay for you to enjoy your experience a little bit, that kind of starts to make an impression and starts to
exactly. It's when I say it's driving us apart, and I think I look at the young men, like on these Ivy League campuses where you have maybe 25% of the young women, they've taken one too many gender studies courses. They've learned that they live in a capitalist, heteropatriarchal, imperialist, white supremacist society, and any hint of a suggestion of a stereotype comment or something, they're going to call what do they call? They have microaggression teams that are looking for any hint of a suggestion of sexism, and they're rushing and telling and turning them in and so forth. Who would want to be in that environment? I would probably just retreat to my dorm room with my best friends, and then God knows what we'd say.
Yeah, it's painful. It's hard. It's hard to relate to each other when we have such different experiences. And I don't know.
I don't think we have different experiences. That should be the basis to overcome bigotry. Microaggressions. Microaggressions are, little unconscious, not unintentional put downs where you'll meet someone, they have a foreign sounding name, and you ask them where they're from, even though they're from Arizona, they could have an Indian name or a Spanish name, and these sorts of things. And apparently that's can be minimizing and a bad experience. Actually, I'd like to see a poll because I'm not sure that that's true, but I can imagine all sorts of things that people say that are insensitive. And the way to overcome that is familiarity. Is for these kids on campus from all different backgrounds to become friends through common interests. And then what you discover, it's very hard to maintain a prejudice against a group when you have a particular person from that group and you're friends, because once you're friends you see past all the exterior stereotypes and you perceive the person. And then it's a common humanity. And I'm afraid we're just setting up barriers where we can't get there.
Yeah. Well, and I think, everybody could be more sensitive, right? If I'm in a team of a bunch of male programmers and a woman gets added and she's not accustomed to insulting each other as a way of operating, that's something that I should be aware of and try to accommodate her needs. And I
would say both sides. My advice would be both sides. I think the young men should understand that. Well, you should see how she reacts, and then if you see she's hurt, then just say, you apologize, and then obviously you have to be careful, or you could just explain, we don't mean it that way. When I call you a name, it's because I love you, or when I call you a name, it's because you're my friend. And some women don't know that. And on the other hand, the women could be, just say, I'm not used to this, and give me a break here, and this makes me feel bad, whatever. You could talk to each other, but it's almost as if we're past that. Before you can even talk to each other and work it out, somebody's going to report. I'm talking about the campus now. This isn't, I hope, and not the workplace yet. And the campus, she's already reported you. Yeah. And I do agree. I think that there's good-heartedness behind the idea of trigger warnings or microaggressions. There's an impulse to protect vulnerable people. And people do say insensitive things. Like I see sometimes on Twitter, people calling each other retards. And the mother in me wants to step in and say, find a better word. And, if there are people that have children or they could be listening, then this terminology, who are, what's the correct word now? I can't even think, but mentally challenged, they find another way to say it. And, so I'm not in favor of people using harsh terms and insensitive. But again, there's a better way to convey that than to have these microaggression teams and the language police and calling people out and approaching them in a state of anger and in this rancorous state rather than in a human way, and just say, hey, it's just not cool. Don't talk that way.
Yeah. Coming with I don't like that rather than an accusation of you nasty name, whatever it is. Yeah. Growing up, right. My friends and I calling each other fag and retard was pretty much what we did. That's it was just ingrained into our culture that's the way things were. And
it was fun. It was funny, and you weren't. It was something about you. Well, you weren't referring disparagingly. You weren't deliberately denigrating a group of people. So we learn about this as we get older. We don't talk that way, but then you'll find other words. But even the teasing and razzing, it's going to go on with boys and girls. That I don't know. Maybe these feminists don't have any brothers or something. They don't realize that there is that spirit of sort of teasing one another, and in these put downs is how boys show affection. And I even like my sons. One of my sons was playing video games, and I wondered, I didn't know what games, and to this day I don't know what games they were playing, but they would be downstairs in the basement playing video games, and I would look down and think I was supposed to be worried. What I saw was friendship, camaraderie, laughter. They were supporting each other. It was just fun, and there was nothing pathological going on. It was about them and their friendship. So there was a time where I defended video games because I looked at the data. When I wrote my book, The War Against Boys, I thought I would go after video games. I thought, these are harmful to boys. I couldn't find any evidence of that. And the best research I could find, it's like saying movies are harmful or books are harmful, or, this is the realm of the imagination. And we have to be careful about attributing, thinking that because someone is reading a violent fairy tale, they're going to become violent. It just doesn't happen that way. So anyway, that's how I felt about my kids playing those games and seeing how boys played. And I could see that it would be trouble if a girl went in and played that way, and they were carrying on and teasing each other. What I did find is there are girls who are serious gamers, and they can dish it out as well as any boy, and they get right. And they were offended by the feminists who came in and started critiquing their games. So.
Yeah, I guess, I've heard, Dr. Jordan Peterson talking about how that he's gotten so much mail from transgender people, right? Being famously that he didn't want to use the compelled pronouns in the Canadian, legislation, and that the majority of the mail that he's received from transgender persons are saying, thank you, and that it's, that these activists don't represent me, and I want to just live like anybody else and not be addressed with special pronouns or whatever it was. And I thought that was pretty telling that that the people that are actually in these groups aren't necessarily represented by the extremist views.
No, it's now we have these cultural police, self-appointed, who are going along and going into subcultures and trying to police them. And I think that they should maybe talk to the women in those cultures that are happy with it and figure it out before they pounce. But it's not the way it works. So that you just and what worries me now with censorship is it's not just it's bad when universities have censorship policies, but even if you don't have them, you can threaten people and encourage a kind of self-censorship, and so people can't be themselves and say what's on their mind, and then ideas, and I don't mean just bad words, because I do believe in being polite and civil, and that's just part of being a humane person. But it seems to me that now people are afraid to express ideas, and whole areas, and that self-centered, except when they're with their best friends or something. So it kind of what we see is a diminishing of the public square and people who on a campus I'm talking about, who can just in the classroom say what they want. They're afraid that they'll be won't be taken, won't be listened to, and they'll be dehumanized. I mean, because it's a dehumanizing process that happens on campus when they call you out and carry on and turn you in and so forth.
Yeah, isn't the response to, right? I mean, the champions of social justice, allegedly, right? from my perspective, it tends to dehumanize more than the people that they are allegedly protecting people against.
Who are the dehumanizers?
Well, that's it.
Am I making any sense?
They do to others what they claim is done to them. So
Yeah,
you'll have the
yeah.
social justice warriors, and they will stereotype, otherize, dehumanize, and call people terrible names, gang up on them. They do that. Those are their tactics, and they're the very tactics of those they say they oppose. They become what they dislike, and that's always a risk when you become a radical, is that you will begin taking on the qualities of your oppressor. So this is what I see. If you look at, I don't know if some of your viewers, they should look at it, Evergreen State. This poor professor, very liberal guy, he just simply did not go along with some kooky ideas, and it was insane what happened on that campus. And the students were wandering around with bats, and the police told him he wasn't safe on campus for expressing an idea. Where, I would look at Evergreen State. I think it's an outlier, it's an extreme, but it should hold up a mirror to every college in the campus, if sort of the future, what you will become if you go down this road too far, where you get a campus just so polarized around race, class, gender, call-outs, safe space, and so forth. It divides people, and it undermines the possibility, I think, of education.
It is a remarkable story. I've been glued to YouTube to see what's going on with Evergreen State. It's compelling. It's addictive, right? I can't turn my eyes away from it.
A new tape, but something that's happened. Well, now I think isn't it summer vacation? They should go home. I think they've gone home by now, but maybe the troublemakers graduated. That's one thing I remember as a college professor, that if there was anything going on campus, you just wait. Next year, it'll be something else. So I'm curious, though, to see what happens this year. Already, Ben Shapiro is a conservative speaker, very bright. I don't agree with him on everything, but I've shared the stage with him. Actually, I spoke at DePaul, where he had been banned. And the day that I spoke, we had this little arrangement where he was going to be in the audience and then come up on the stage. Just, I had the right as a speaker to invite him up on the stage. Well, the university found out that Ben was planning to come, and he was not. They had police, at the periphery of the campus to keep him off campus. He's an Orthodox Jew. He's just a conservative Republican. He's not a Milo. He's not, and I think Milo should be able to speak on campus too, but the idea that you would ban Ben Shapiro means you're just banning Republicans. And they did it at DePaul. But what we did was he Skyped in, and I had my iPad and showed him off stage, and then we all decamped to a nearby bar that somehow had a big basement, and the whole, I don't know, it was an audience of about 200 people. We went into this basement and finished our lecture.
What I thought was really remarkable about Evergreen, even beyond the interactions with Brett Weinstein, the professor, right? Even beyond that, right? The videos of the students screaming at the president of the university, just laying into him. And maybe I'm missing something, and maybe they have some real grievances and some things that need to be addressed. And I am skeptical of that claim. But even if so, I mean, can't you express your grievances without screaming at somebody? Isn't that a violation of basic decorum?
I know. And although I say that having been a protester in college, I think I did once scream at a dean. But fortunately, there was no YouTube to haunt me. But they're young, and I don't even blame them entirely, because you want to know, students don't act like that unless someone provoked them it taught them to see the world that way. I just wonder who the professors were that gave them this angry theory of life to see themselves. Here they are at Evergreen State, where you can design your own major and God knows, do whatever you want, and they feel oppressed. It's ludicrous, and but they were. This is our, that was their educational system, and I wonder what was going on in those classes. And if you look at that principal, he didn't do a very good job defending free speech. He let himself be pushed around. There's one point where he's lecturing, and he's using his hands, and then they start jeering at him. It looked like a struggle session in the Chinese Cultural Revolution where they said, put your hands down, and then they laughed at him because he put his hands down. It was humiliating. He was dehumanized. It's humiliating. And this is what we have. So this is where this identity politics is leading us. I hope we don't go there. I hope that's the extent of it, but that remains to be seen.
Yeah. And especially, I mean, when a feminist is denounced as being something other than a feminist, right? I mean,
it's not only me. People like Wendy Kaminer, brilliant feminist who's written a lot about civil liberties and free speech, and she was targeted with all sorts of derision because of something she said. There was a debate at Brown University. It was two feminists. One was defending the idea that the campus was a rape culture. The other was questioning it. This was considered taboo, and the students, with the full participation of the president of Brown University, they formed a safe room where people could be safe from this debate. I'm telling you, this is so shocking to me as a philosopher to think that people would want to be safe from a debate on a college campus. But this is happening, so...
I think there is something to the idea of safe space, right? I mean, I think of my home is my safe space, right? When I am in my home, the people who are around me are my most loved and cherished, individuals in my world, and and people that I invite into my home, and that should be a safe space for me. There shouldn't, I shouldn't have to face the difficulties of the world and some of those things. I'd like to think that I am strong enough to go out in the world and face down some of those things that cause me angst and terror and all of those things, and stand up for what I think is right and all of that. But yeah, I think it's ideal that we all do have a safe space, and for those children whose homes are a place of terror because of abuse or any of those kinds of things, what an even greater tragedy, right? That one place where you should always be safe is taken away from them. So I don't know. I guess I'd push back a little bit on the idea that safe space is total lunacy. But at the same time, it is going too far to have pillows and stuffed animals and coloring books because Christina Hoff Sommers comes to speak at your school.
Yeah, bubbles and Play-Doh, and it was infantilizing. Yeah, this is a little different. Speaking about your home, or even kids having clubs, you had Hillels for Jewish students and the Black Student Center. So okay, fine, I can understand that. It's gone too far when they begin spending all their time there. That's their total identity, is with their whatever identity group they have to have, and then they start accusing other students, and now they want separate dorms. Each identity group is wanting more and more, and it's going to pull us apart. And the thing is, at a college, you should be spending most of your time studying great systems of thought and great books and the great philosophers, and you'll be learning, universal ideas of civilization. And now they're even rejecting that. They're saying, logic and reason, those are tools of the masculinist oppressor. And so what are they going to do instead? So they say, well, instead of that, we want lived experience. We want just people to tell stories. Well, there are a lot of stories out there. Everybody has a story. Eventually, you have to distill from the stories some universals. So you might as well just start with a good classics curriculum. We've done it. But this is why I say it's a reactionary movement. It's reactionary and undoing basic rights of free speech and due process. And I think deeply anti-intellectual.
Yeah. I guess if you want to find a way to portray yourself as a victim, no matter who you are, you can do it, right? I mean, you could find a way to do that.
Well, first of all, and I've been at colleges where, a white male will get up and say, I'm dyslexic, and, I have a stutter or something, and some mental thing. You can't tell when you meet somebody how oppressed they are, or privileged they are. And I don't want to assume that I wouldn't assume on campus that because a student was Black or Hispanic, Asian, that they were oppressed. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't, maybe they were privileged. And there's so many ways in which you can be which you can be burdened with afflictions, and some people can thrive. If there's sexism or racism, it bothers some people more than others, and people are individuals, and that's what counts most. And you've got to find out and judge them that way.
Just like there are a lot of women who will appreciate a good sexual joke, right?
And I think
that's
about
the thing.
all the
I
comedians.
actually have seen data on this. About 20% of everybody. Well, I saw this a long time ago. It was from a Columbia University professor, Carol Vance, a feminist. And there once was a war among feminists over pornography. And some feminists they were called the pro-sex feminists. They defended it. And then you had another group led by Catherine McKinnon and Andrea Dworkin who were against it. And I remember this woman, Carol Vance, I think she was an anthropologist at Columbia, who said that about 20% of people like off-color jokes. They love them and they tell. About 60% of people kind of don't care, not particularly interested, but they don't mind. And then about 20% hate it. And I think, but it's switched. We became very, the standards were pretty low and people were saying all sorts of things. Now it's been replaced by prudery, where you can't say anything without someone being, ruffled feathers and rushing off. So, yeah, there are women who don't mind and who are as foul-mouthed as any guy.
Yeah, certainly.
Not me. But do I care? I don't want... I'm probably in that 60% somewhere. I'm not going to be offended, but...
You mentioned Milo Yiannopoulos at one point, right? And I've heard you say that you kind of feel like you're a mother to him in a way, kind of that, you're a little bit of a counterbalance to his...
I tried. It didn't work. It was such a loss because if you go back and see when he first came out, not in that sense, but when he was first on the scene, he was very funny, very witty, and, edgy. Once Trump came along, he just was, and I begged him. I said, "What is this about?" And stop attacking people, attack ideas, but don't go after people. And he didn't listen. So, it's a loss. Though he had a lot of talent, and maybe he'll come back. Americans don't mind, contrary to the usual saying, "There's no second acts in American life." There are second acts. He could come back, but he's got to be kinder and more respectful, I think.
Yeah. Well, we love a redemption story, right? I think that is a part of Western culture, and it's probably universal to the human condition that it appeals to us.
Well, people change. People can change. And Michael Kenny's very bright, but I feel bad about that.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, and you've really made me think with the idea of that the religion of social justice doesn't have a redemption story, right? It is your original sin is perpetual. And thank you very much. It's been a joy, and I'll even say privilege to get to speak with you. I've enjoyed this a lot.
Well, it's been a privilege for me. Thank you.